why don't we start with a little bit of a kavanah. We gather together out of the brokenness of division and rights divested, persecution of the vulnerable in the name of religious freedom, granting equal protection to the oppressors rather than the oppressed. We gather in community, seeking wholeness and peace in the timeless wisdom of Torah. May we find together the shalom and the shlemut, the peace and the completeness that we seek. Okay, so an opening question. Of your five senses, which do you find the most trustworthy?
The most.
Most trustworthy, and is that sense foolproof?
I'll just say, I'm not going to answer your question. I just finished reading this article about Uri Geller in the New York Times. I was going to say sight, and then I said, no, I just read about the bending spoons and I still don't get it. So I'm going to pause and move on, but it's quite fascinating.
Is Uri Geller limited to five senses? He may even be like...
No, just it's all about sight. So I was going to say sight, and then I suddenly thought about this article and I was like, nope, I'm not going to say sight.
Could you say a bit more, Susanna? Now I'm...
No, you know who he is, Israeli magician who was, became a multimillionaire by bending spoons with his psychic powers, and to this day will not reveal like what it is. And people, all the magicians all around the world are furious at him because he became this huge celebrity by telling everyone that he had these extraordinary supernatural psychic powers. But it is, as I understand it, a visual trick. But millions and millions of people believe that he could literally look at a spoon like this and bend it with his extrasensory powers.
So this is to the point that your eyes cannot necessarily be trusted.
And also with the modern, with what goes on now with the how they change things, like you can't trust a picture anymore.
Right.
You don't know what. I would have said sight too, but now it doesn't work because there's so much manipulation of the visual that it's hard to know what's true.
So what's interesting is that if sight has been sort of degraded in terms of its reliability, then is there a sense that steps up to first place?
Yeah, critical thinking. I mean, you really have to use your heads now.
Yes, I guess technically, I don't know if that's a sense, but yeah, critical thinking is critical. Yeah. Suzanne, go ahead.
As I had an aunt who went completely deaf, and my father also became very, very hard of hearing. And if it comes on sort of later in life, it's very, very hard to adjust for people. And what happened, I know with my aunt, we didn't know if it was dementia because she wasn't responding properly. It's horrible. I like all my senses. Taste? Oh, I love food.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chocolate?
Although I guess they're fabricating tastes in the lab.
I mean, I think the point is that any one of the five senses can be distorted or misperceived or degraded or eroded over time. And that what's wonderful about the Havdalah, for example, which some of us spent a lot of time thinking about this year, is that it brings together all of them, and that one without the other is really not shalem. It's not, it's not to be trusted. And so it's the combination that's so miraculous, and that we have these gifts. But it is interesting that I think the primary ones that most of us are talking about and come up with are sight and sound, for cognition, for perception, for understanding. And the other ones are somewhat less appreciated, maybe mistakenly so.
Until you lose it. Imagine not being able to feel a caress or not being able to feel that the stove is too hot. The touch comes in, until you lose it.
Frank Bruni, I think, had some vision problems and has now had to take in his information by the ear. And he's written pretty eloquently of having to shift over books on tape and things like that. And we start from a baseline where I think the statistic is something like 80% of our perceptions are sight perceptions. So it's a very dominant, Susanna, I think you used the point of sort of cognition, or, I mean, it's the overwhelming input we rely on when we have it.
When I was a teenager, I had volunteered to take blind children to the circus, which, like I would sit beside them and describe what was going on. And you would be surprised what smell does. They could tell eventually which animal it was, you know.
And then you see a dog who can recognize a person they love from like sometimes a mile away. It's extraordinary, the sense of smell that many creatures have, that's so far superior to ours, and what it does, it's to them as important as the sight is to us.
Yes.
No.
So I'm not going to say my thought, but now I'm thinking, well, how do I ever decide something is true? What is the process? And so that is the sort of almost the next question. I'm not going to go there, but it does lead there. So
yes, and that picks up on Merle's comment. It is the question of, after you've brought this all in, how some of it false and potentially misleading, how do you figure out the truth? Thank you for raising that issue, which I think actually is implicated in this parsha. So let's start with summary of the parsha. So pretty straightforward summary. It's basically, even though it's named Balak, it's the story of Bilaam. Well, I don't know what he is. We'll talk about what he is. The Moabite king Balak, for whom the parsha is named, seeks to have Bilaam curse the Israelites. And the plan goes spectacularly wrong, as Bilaam ends up blessing the Israelites instead. And then at the end of the parsha, there's this episode where the Israelite men consort with the Moabite women, and the zealous grandson of Aaron, Pinchas, spears one of the Israelite men and the Moabite woman through the belly. In liturgical time, we continue to make our way through the summer month of Tammuz. In our slow march to the month of Av, just 2 days ago, we observed, some observed, occurred, I didn't observe it, the minor fast of the 17th day of Tammuz. And that begins a 3-week period leading up to Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av. By tradition, the 17th day of Tammuz was the day that Moshe came down from his 40 days on Mount Sinai, saw the Israelites worshiping the golden calf, and smashed the first set of tablets. So that's the first tragedy of that day. And the second tragedy of that day is it was the day when the walls of Jerusalem were breached as the Romans laid siege to the city before ultimately destroying the second temple and initiating the exile in which most of us still live. Just a few words of context on the parsha as we come into it. Immediately before this story, the Israelites, this mass of slaves that has just escaped from Egypt, have improbably annihilated two of the greatest powers in the region, the Amorites and their king Sichon, and the kingdom of Bashan, led by their king Og. And so the Moabites are a relatively small power in the region, and they hear word of these victories, and they are very alarmed. And so let's go to the beginning of the Parsha, which is in Bamidbar, Numbers, chapter 22, verses 2 through 4. Claudia, would you like to read that? Do you have it in front of you?
I do.
Please.
Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field."
So this is our introduction to the king Balak. Bilaam's still off stage. But let's talk for a second about Balak's state of mind and his motivation as we see it in these verses.
He's frightened.
He's frightened. And what's frightening him, I guess?
The size and the history of these people that are about to descend upon him.
Right. Any other observations? Take a look at that sentence 3. Vayigar Moav.
Because Pharaoh was afraid that.
Pharaoh.
Yeah.
And what's the code word? What's the code word?
Rav who?
Rav.
There were numerous.
Yeah,
There were
Rav.
too many of them.
Right. So that's the same word that's used at the beginning of Exodus. Balak is fearful of the Israelites, and there's this word Rav, ki Ravhu. This nation is numerous, and that
Right.
echoes Pharaoh. So there's another thing going on in sentence 4, the metaphor to the ox licking clean, and this word for licking clean in Hebrew is yalachachu. So you can really feel your tongue licking as you say yalachachu. It's onomatopoeia. But there's something else going on there, right? What's going on in using this ox metaphor?
Well, it's dehumanizing the people,
Right.
which is what you have to do when you want to obliterate a people.
Right.
You
And
know, I
Go ahead.
just listened to a whole podcast about the Peel report in the late 30s. And it's the same thing. You know, the Arabs were afraid that too many Jews were coming in and were going to overtake them in the land of then called Palestine. Same thing.
Same thing.
And,
Yeah.
you know, in Quebec, at one point when the whole separatist thing was going on, there was a whole editorial in one of the major French press that the Jews were sort of taking over too much of the space. So as soon as we become, you know, that feeling is still there.
Yeah. And I think as we've discussed in the past, the way immigrants are discussed as, you know, in an invasion, a horde, a pestilence. When you go back to the Pharaoh story, the verb that's used for the spread of the Israelites is vayishritzu, which is a word which you would apply to a reptile.
Yes, it's like swarming.
They're swarming, exactly.
Yeah.
So similar kind of dehumanization of the horde. Okay, so.
But also just the fear that they will take over their things. And, you know, it's not licking up the grass of the field. It's like they're going to consume what is ours, our land, our food, our possessions. And this is very much what's going on today in Europe, for example, where yesterday the Dutch government collapsed over these issues.
Nice. Thank you for pointing out. Even the grass is a metaphor on that, and the land. Very.
So, Rich, when you said there's words that connect to the pharaonic time, were you referring to one of the plagues, like the plague of locusts, or not?
Oh, okay. So at the very beginning of Exodus, when it talks about these are the 70 that came down, and then a new Pharaoh comes in that didn't know Joseph. And then Pharaoh turns to his advisors and says, these people are numerous and they're swarming and we need to deal with them. Okay, so we've talked about Balak as being motivated by fear, dread. And then in verse 4, there's this reference to the Midianites. So it says, Moab speaks to the elders of Midian. Why are they in here?
That's Moses' father-in-law is a Midianite.
Yes, that's a good connection. Moses' father-in-law is a Midianite.
His wife.
Who knew?
And his wife. I mean, Moses probably spent 40 years in Midian.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, however old he was when he escaped Egypt, and I'd have to sort of go back and remember that, but he spent his adulthood in Midian. And I think Rashi comments that the Moabites wanted to get intel on Moses. Who is this leader? And what the Midianites told him was, his power is in his mouth. And so the Moabites said, let's go get somebody whose power is in his mouth.
Ah.
That's why they went to Bilam. Isn't that great? Now we're going to go to Bilam, who enters on the scene, and we're going to do Bamidbar verses 5 and 6. Ken, do you have your Chumash open there?
Sure. And Balak, the son of Zippor, was king of Moab at the time, and he sent messengers unto Balaam, the son of Beor, to Pethor, which is by the river, to the land of the children of his people, to call him, saying, Behold, there's a people come out from Egypt. Behold, they cover the face of the earth, and they abide over against me. Come now, therefore, I pray thee, curse me this people, for they are too mighty for me. Peradventure I shall prevail, that we may smite them, and that I may drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom thou blessed is blessed, and he whom thou cursest is cursed.
Okay, let's just, thank you. Let's pause there for a second. And who is this guy? Anyway, who is Bilam? What's his thing?
Sounds like the priest of the people.
Yeah, maybe he's a priest. It's a little bit unclear. Is there another way to think about a guy who holds himself out as having the power to bless and curse?
Sounds a little bit
Magician.
like an autocrat.
A magician, right? And what did you say, Merle?
An autocrat.
An autocrat?
Only he could say it.
Yeah, there is some echo of that.
Yeah.
What else? Maybe a bit of a charlatan,
Yeah.
right? Preying on people who are afraid. Why don't we continue on? And Susanna, do you want to continue?
Elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, Spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as the Lord may instruct me. So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and said, What do these people want of you? Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came out of Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off. But God said to Balaam, Do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed. Balaam arose in the morning and said to Balak's dignitaries, Go back to your own country, for the Lord will not let me go with you.
Okay, so story plays out a little bit more. Maybe we get a little bit more of a clue as to who this guy is. So, well, where are you now?
There's
What?
not many people that the Bible says that God spoke directly to. Well, God speaking directly to him means that he's a pretty important person.
Yeah, I mean, they are in conversation, right? Not only are they in conversation, but what more do we see about Bilam following that conversation?
He listens to him. He
Yeah.
tells him to go back. God said no.
God says no, and Balaam says, I can't go.
I don't go. Yeah.
So he's not a charlatan necessarily, right?
We're trying
he's
to
not-
figure it out. Now let's keep going. Okay, we got verses 16 through 20. Okay, and Merle?
Then Balak sent other dignitaries, more numerous and distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said to him, Thus says Balak, son of Zippor, please do not refuse to come to me. I will reward you richly, and I will do anything you ask of me. Only come and damn these people for me. Balaam replied to Balak's officials, Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not do anything, big or little, contrary to the command of the Lord my God. Is he a Jew? So you too stay here overnight and let me find out what else the Lord may say to me. That night God came to Balaam and said to him, If these men have come to invite you, you may go with them. But whatever I command you, that you shall do.
Okay, thank you. One translation note here, and then we'll talk about what we think of these verses. The second verse that was read, I think it's 17, it says, Ki kaved achabedcha, I will reward you richly. That sort of implies money. But what is kabed?
Heavy.
What's that?
Kaveh means
Honor.
Honor. Yeah,
Honor.
yeah, you're right. You're right. Kaved is heavy, but it's kavod is
Right.
really the word root. And so
Hmm.
what Balak is offering Bilam through these emissaries is honor. And then in the next verse, Bilam says, if you gave me your full storehouse. Okay, so we have a little bit more unspooling here. Any additional thoughts about Bilam?
it's amazing to me that he listens to the God of Israel.
Okay, so we still have this connection to God, and this time the God is not Elohim, but it's Adonai, and that's a little bit more associated with the God of Israel. Okay, what else?
I have a question again.
Yes.
I think Meryl's got to a point that's really very interesting and important in the unfolding of not just this story, but the unfolding of the biblical version. Is there a God that is a God for all people, whether or not one has accepted the 10 Commandments?
So I think that's a good point. I want to reserve on that because we're going to talk about it a little bit later.
Okay.
And, I do think that part of
This is in our Bible. This is our institution in here. So when they're referring to the God in here, we're referring to the God of the Israelites.
well, I'm not sure that that's, I think, Merle, that this is in a way not all that different than Yitro, who was also a priest.
Right.
Right. And I think the connection to the God of Israel is a little bit ambiguous on it. I don't want to run aground on this point here. I do think that the very ambiguity that we're talking about is a little bit of the hinge point of Bilam, of what to think of him. Is he someone who is kind of attuned to the holy, or is he someone who's kind of more of a pagan? But he's speaking with God, and there's something there. But I think there are still some hints here, right, about maybe a slightly negative aspect of
Well,
him.
there's a delaying tactic that he's using going on. I don't know if this is a negative aspect, but there is something where he says, I can't do anything big or little contrary to the command of the Lord my God. So he is claiming Adonai as his God, whoever he is, whoever Balaam is, and whoever this God is.
Right.
But also there's the notion that he's waiting and using God as a foil to push back.
I want to pick up a little bit on Susanna's point, which is to say that one way he is sort of buying time is one way to look at it. But what's going on here, he's going back to God, right? He's asking again. He's, and he didn't know what is it that he didn't like the first answer. And the other thing, and the reason I wanted to point out the mistranslation of honor to money is that when Balak's people come and offer him honor, Bilam says, well, maybe if you offer money. He doesn't quite say, offer me money, but he says, even if you offered me all the money in the world, I can't do this. And yet, after saying that, he goes back to God and says,
right, give me something.
Can I go? And God relents and says, fine, if they come back to you, well, whatever I command you, you're going to have to do. I read some hints here that Balaam is pushing to sort of go on this mission. He's not taking the answer he first heard, and he's pivoting the conversation to money. So, some hints here. And yet, he's still kind of talking to God. He's still invoking God and still saying, that he'll follow what God says. So a little bit of ambiguity. So then when he arose in the morning, Balaam saddled his ass, departed with the Moabite dignitaries, but God was incensed at his going. So now that's ambiguous. A messenger of God took a position in his way as an adversary. He was riding on his she-ass with his 2 servants alongside. When the ass caught sight of the messenger of Adonai standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand, the ass swerved from the road, went into the fields, and Balaam beat the ass to turn her back to the road. And when I was younger in yeshiva, the question was, where's constipation mentioned in the Bible? And the answer is Bilam couldn't move his ass. And I'm sorry, I just had to say that. Now it's out of the way. Well, there you go. Okay, so terrible. All right, so you know the rest of the story. Bilam beats the donkey, finally says to him, why are you beating me? Can't you see why I can't move? And then Bilam's eyes open and he sees the angel of God that's been blocking the way. And he says, okay, I'll turn back. The angel says, go ahead, but you get to do only what I tell you to do. And then Balaam tries several times to curse the Israelites, unable to do so. Finally, he blesses the Israelites with words so beautiful that we sing them in our liturgy. Ma tovu ohelecha Yaakov, mishkatecha Yisrael. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel. Okay, so yes, Claudia.
I've been trying to put myself in Balaam's place, and the first thing that came to me was, oh, if my ruler, I'm not entirely clear that Balak is Balaam's, king, but if a king comes to me a second time and says, do it, I don't know that I would have the chutzpah to say, what about no, do you not understand?
Yeah.
And so that was my first thought, but then my second thought had to do with when people do bad things because they're ordered to, or you die, like people who cooperated with the Nazis, people who are cooperating with any of the autocrats, murderers nowadays, because if I don't do it, then I'm going to get killed, but then they are collaborators. Where does that put somebody who is facing, and there's no implication of negative consequences for Balaam, so it's not in the text, but that was what came out of me putting myself in his place and thinking, how much of a hard no would I have the koach to say, to do?
Yeah.
That's all.
So, it's an interesting point. The way I read this is that Bilam is not a Moabite, that Balak actually believes that Bilam has this power, which is why he's showing up. So I'm not sure that he would muscle Bilam. He might feel that might backfire. And I don't know that Bilam feels beholden to this weaker king who's not his king. The other thing that I've heard is that there are historical artifacts that refer to a kind of preacher man, with the ability, a seer, I think is referred to, that people have identified with Balaam from around this period. So I think this is kind of an old story that was kind of knit in
Yeah.
to the Torah.
That's what I think. And, don't forget, Balaam had the power to curse.
Yeah.
So Barak was probably afraid that if he pushed him, he would curse him. And
Yeah.
one of the things that it just struck me, we start our entrance into prayer with the words of Balaam, who is not Jewish.
Right.
We're taking the words as, it's our entrance. The first thing we say in Shabbat services is the words of a foreign priest, if you will.
Right. Complimentary of us, but
But the words that God put in his mouth.
Correct.
Yeah.
But
And that
it's
is
just
a God
interesting.
beyond the Israelite.
We could have used all kinds of words from all kinds of our ancestors. This guy wasn't our ancestor, and we're using these words that says something about us.
Yeah.
Well, maybe it says that he is and isn't our ancestor. Just the way we move back in time to other characters who make their way into the Torah,
Yeah.
that we are part and parcel of a world that has been created, right, by a force, by a God, and that we have taken a special responsibility, but not necessarily that it is only our God.
I really like that point, and it's so true that the whole concept of the chosen people, which is one of the most loaded concepts in the Torah, right, could either mean that we're elevated and we're special, or something, maybe less chauvinistic, that we've, maybe been given a mission that and a responsibility to fulfill. But it's in service of spreading kind of a message of the God of all. So
Right.
yeah. So that's,
Right.
I think, well stated, Debbie, and I think it's part of what's going on. So I want to move us to what the rabbis have made of this story, with its head fakes one way or the other as to who Bilam is. So the first place I want to go is virtually to the end of the Torah, and you can go to Deuteronomy 30, chapter 34, and this is this incredible scene, right, where Moses goes up to the mountaintop and he dies by the kiss of God. And then the Torah ends with this beautiful statement of who Moses was to God and in our tradition.
It's a Vizot HaBracha, actually.
Is it Vizot HaBracha? Thank you.
Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom the Lord singled out face to face.
Okay, thank you. So Lokam B'Yisrael, right? These words, Lokam Navi Od B'Yisrael, are incorporated into Yigdal, right? So we sing this at the end of Sabbath services and holiday services. And so the Hebrew is V'lo kam Navi Od B'Yisrael. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses. So the Or HaChaim, Moroccan 18th century commentator, zeroes in on the Israel, and he's channeling also some other earlier midrashic sources to say, our sages claim that the word B'Yisrael means that whereas no comparable prophet arose in Israel, there was a prophet of comparable stature amongst the Gentiles, Bilam. So here's a rabbinic source that elevates Bilam for all the reasons that we've talked about. He's a man of God. He is a man of God. Okay, and then the Midrash goes further, but there's a difference between the prophecy of Moses and the prophecy of Bilam. Listen to these. Moses did not know who was speaking to him. Bilam did know. And they're all, these textual sites that support these things, but just focusing on the headlines. Moses did not know when he would speak to God until he did so. Bilam did know, and there's another textual reference in the story. And then finally, Moses did not speak with him unless he was standing, and Bilam spoke with him when he was fallen. Okay, and so there are these various aspects that we've discussed where some rabbis look at the story and say that Bilam is in fact, I don't know about equivalent to Moses, but he's definitely a Moses-like figure. But the verdict generally on Bilam is that though he channels the word of God, he's ultimately not a good guy. This fact that he pushes back on God, that he seems to be attuned to the money, that he's willing to curse the Israelites first and foremost, he's willing to do that, and he has to be going out on this, even though he has some permission from God, he's wheedled it out of him. And look, it's kind of ambiguous, but the rabbinic authority really comes down on the side of not a great guy. So there's one midrashic source that plays on the name Bilam, right? Bilam as a contraction of below without a nation. So so basically, who's a mercenary. He's got no loyalty. He's got no national identity, and he's basically a cursor for hire. And it's, I guess, a criticism that you could level at a lot of our modern day politicians, right? They're not people of principle, they're just, they're people of expediency. So they don't like that. And then on this one, this next source, I just have to share the screen and you'll see why.
While you're looking, they said of Moses Maimonides, Moshe Moshe Kam Moshe.
Right.
Yeah.
That is the benchmark. Moshe is it. Okay, so let me find this. Okay, so this is from Sanhedrin, and I'm going to read it because I'm not going to ask anybody to read it. The Gemara
Wow.
relates, Balaam was a diviner by using his penis. This is you can't make this up. It is written here, fallen yet with open eyes. So they come up with a textual reference, and it's written there. And Haman was fallen upon the divan whereupon Esther was. So they use this parallel phrase of fallen, indicating the sexual connotation. And then it was stated that there's an Amoraic dispute with the guy. So they fought over this issue. And Mar Zutra says Balaam was a diviner by using his penis. Mar, the son of Ravina, says he engaged with bestiality with his.
Oh my God.
Okay, so like
I'm telling you, these rabbis were just really bored.
we're talking ad hominem, right?
I mean, get a life. Come on.
Get a life. But
This is Joanne. Can I just throw something in here?
please,
Back to this not being Jewish or Israelite, or however one wants to define it. That just the reference to there was none like Moses, and then Deuteronomy 18:18, which is, I will raise up a prophet from among their own people like yourself. That there will be prophets like Moses from among other peoples.
so Joanne, what a
Yeah.
wonderful connection you've just made, and you've anticipated where we're headed.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
No, I love it. I mean, anytime you can do the segue, like I usually pay for that privilege. If we're doing it for free. But yes, there is this question of raising up prophets, and we'll go there. Thank you for raising it. And so your point with that is to say that there may be prophets in other nations.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay, good.
Mm.
So here's another twist in thinking about Bilaam. So there's a midrashic strain that ties Bilaam to Abraham.
Hmm.
Okay, so first of all, remember Balak's words, I heard that the people you bless are blessed and the people you curse are cursed. That's from Lech Lecha, where God says to Abraham, go forth, leave your land, and I'll make you a blessing, and the people who bless you will be blessed, and the people who curse you will be cursed. So that's kind of the first language tie that the rabbis seize on. And then in addition, this, if you take a look at the Akedah involves saddling an ass
Mhm.
to go out on a journey. It involves an angel, and it involves a knife. So, you've got
And a message from God.
and a message from God, exactly, that someone goes and follows.
Mhm.
So it's an interesting tie, but the rabbis do not say that Bilaam is an Abrahamic figure. Instead, they say Abraham has all these good virtues and Bilaam has all of these bad virtues. So it's this time the tie is drawn as a matter of contrast. So
Talking in speculation, just for fun. After Sarah dies, Abraham remarries and has a bunch of kids with other people. We never know who those descendants are. Maybe Balaam is one of those descendants from one of those, not the direct line from Sarah, but
yeah.
a direct line from Abraham.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Because
Yeah,
we don't hear about the other children, what happened to them. I was shocked to read that because he was I don't know how old, and he's still begatting.
Yeah, still begatting. Yeah.
But
That's
the
great.
initial story the story of Isaac and his brother, right? We know from the beginning that there will be another Semitic tribe, right? We know there'll be another people, another Abrahamic people. This is a story about the universal experience through the eyes, Hebraic or the Israelite experience.
Okay, thank you. Susanna, did I see you just?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I just want to speculate that I think the rabbis, the rabbinic commentators may have needed to sort of minimize or even sort of negate the good prophecy of Bilaam because he was a foreigner, and they were afraid to allow this blessing to reach a higher status, and so they sort of put it down. Because the way I read the text, indeed, and especially with Balaam saying, "I'm going to wait for my God to tell me what to do," and like Abraham, trusting that God will tell him the right thing when he looks out over the people. I don't know if going back to your site, like seeing the tents and sort of reversing the curse to a blessing is something that God put in Balaam's mouth, or whether he actually had a transformation, or whether he was ever intending to curse the Israelites. But having the pressure of a king with all the powers that king had, commanding you to do this and refusing multiple times, is indeed a very powerful form of resistance, and with faith overriding that fear that any person like a Balaam might have had. And so I tend to dismiss all those rabbinic commentators that try to put him down as being afraid to make somebody who's not an Israelite like a Moshe.
That's really interesting. Thank you for that strain of commentary. Claudia.
Building on both Susanna and Deborah, what I'm feeling moved by is, I forget what the four things are in Pardes. I know the first one is Peshat, so Deborah, the level of, he could have been a descendant of Abraham, but on another level, there's a message which is anybody can, by choice, turn toward Elohai, my God, but take on my God, even though he never converts formally. I mean, neither does the Jethro, as far as I know, Yitro, but anybody can choose to draw closer and listen and ask to be guided. Anybody, if you choose.
That's great too. I really appreciate the pivot towards universalism. I think it's definitely in the story. I want to, at this point, give Joanne her due, because she has perfectly anticipated the next turn in the conversation. And it is a text in Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 18. And Joanne, I know you have altar usually, right? Would you be able to read verses 18 through 22 for us in altar?
I will raise up a prophet for them from among their own people, like yourself. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will speak them all that I command him. And if anybody fails to heed the words he speaks in my name, I myself will call him to account. But any prophet who presumes to speak in my name an oracle that I did not command him to utter, or who speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. And should you ask yourselves, how can we know that the oracle was not spoken by the Lord? If the prophet speaks in the name of the Lord and the oracle does not come true, that oracle was not spoken by the Lord. The prophet has uttered it presumptuously. Do not stand in dread of him.
Thank you. So you were perfectly on point, Joanne, pointing us to this whole other section of the Torah that talks about the dilemma of the false prophet, right? That there are going to be other prophets who come up, and they could be from other nations, and they're going to speak in my name. And how do you know? How do you tell the difference? And so the litmus test is, do the words of the prophet come true? So then we're left with, how false is Bilaam, or how true? We sing his words, Ma Tovu, every day, maybe the best known song in the Jewish liturgy. And then consider this verse, Numbers 23, verse 9. And it says, as I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights, there is a people that dwells apart. Am levadad yishkon.
Wow.
not reckoned among the nations. Now, that's not the usual headline for Bilam, but as it relates to the Jewish people, was ever, a prophecy more true than we dwell alone and we dwell apart? So it really is interesting by that litmus test, and considering whether Balaam is a false prophet. I guess those two data points, ring very true for me. So then the other thing, and this has come up, I think, Susanna, you were just referencing it and other people have referenced it when we were talking about the issue of senses. There is a way in which words and hearing are very much dominant in this parsha, and words are even coming out of a donkey's mouth, right? But the word actually that really resonates in this parsha is the word sight. And there are over 20 references to the word sight in this parsha. It is the predominant theme over and over and over. Even the first word of the parsha is vaya'ar, and Balak saw. So in this parsha that's seemingly dominated by words, see subtly takes the center stage. And there's a sense that maybe words can't be trusted, going back to the false prophet. Seeing is believing, as the saying goes, although maybe that's eroding. And sometimes our eyes are not open and we miss what even a dumb ass or a talking one can see. But if we truly look, the truth is there. And then in the dramatic finale, when Balaam, climbs to the mountaintop, now Balaam, seeing that it pleased Adonai to bless Israel, did not, as on previous occasions, go in search of omens, but turned his face towards the wilderness. As Balaam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of God came upon him. Taking up his theme, he said, "Word of Balaam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true." And so this is this theme of the truth being revealed to those with clear sight. So I think, go ahead. Yep.
Add one thing to this site, because the one thing we cannot see is God's face. There is something beyond our sight. I think that's as important as sight being significant,
Yes. No,
I
that's,
wanted to, and I want to go back to something you said earlier. Part of the feminist approach to literature, history, to all of this is believing is also seeing. The other way. We come with our beliefs,
right.
And then see. But I think we should keep in mind that also the way we understand it precedes the sight.
Interesting point. Thank you. Yes, Claudia.
Even though we didn't get to the section where the ass, spoke, and but it says God unfurled, unrolled, Balaam, so Balaam could see the angel, and that was the point. It wasn't the dreams where Balaam said, "Absolutely not. I'm not going after the first time." It took, how many dreams? I forget. But it was when Balaam saw it awake, not asleep, right. So not a dream, the angel, and it was God who was the agent of the unfurling of the eye. Then Balaam believed in that, and after that, that was it.
Yeah.
So that seeing is important.
Yeah. Well, I think it calls, the last two comments really call into question, how do you have clear sight, and how do you see what's there and not be clouded by the colored glasses of your preconceived notions, to really see what's before you. So in reading the story, I can't stop thinking about false prophets of our day, who ask us, in the words of Chico Marx in Duck Soup, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? The demagogues and charlatans of our day purport to speak the truth and portray reality. As with Balak, the people they mislead are motivated by fear and disgust. They are manipulated by signs and symbols. The angels and demons of CRT, caravans of immigrants, transgender kids, the right to life. These symbols are used to distract and manipulate people gripped with fear and loathing. But with clear sight, we can determine whether these prophets are false. The Torah teaches us to determine whether a prophet is the real thing or false with this test: do their predictions come true? The test of truth, the eye test, must also be applied to their description of the present state. And the story they tell is distorted and twisted. They ask you to deny what your eyes are plainly telling you. They are so brazen, which is why they're so dangerous. Bilaam rides in on his ass to teach us something else. In the end, we are saved or undone by our own actions and desires. Bilaam forces his way into the mission he wants to fulfill, asking God for permission to go until he gets it. Still, Bilaam is ultimately stuck doing God's bidding. The narrative comes with a final twist. The Moabites prevail over the Israelites, who are undone by their sexual desire, not by Balaam's curses. And that's what leads to the plague in which 24,000 Israelites perish. The Talmud observes wryly that sometimes we just do what we're going to do. And the quote from Tractate Makot is, "Man is led down the path he chooses to tread." And so may we have clear sight and commitment to moral truth for the road ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting because every time we've been destroyed, the story is that we participated in the destruction. And
Mhm.
right now, I don't even want to comment about what's happening to our
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
Scary, you know. The outside world can't destroy us, but we can destroy ourselves.
All right.
Okay, take care.
Shabbat shalom,
Thank
all.
thank you,
Shalom.
Rich.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.